All right, guys, I have another Sync Academy Pro for you today. This is Johnny joining me for this interview, and I'm really excited to have Johnny here because he is our resident rock slash metal expert in Sync Academy. So he is a rock producer. He actually has an entire series where he walks you through how to create, mix, and master a rock track from start to finish. Johnny is currently working with two music libraries, so he's actively in the licensing business, so he knows what he's talking about. He's been accepted. He's gone through all those phases that a lot of you guys are going through where you're just building up your catalog and trying to get accepted and trying to get into the industry. Johnny has certainly gone through that process, and now he's actively building his catalog with his library partners. And so I'm just thankful that he's generous enough to share that content and that sort of wisdom that he's learned already in this business. So Johnny, welcome. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through a little bit about how you got into music licensing and why you decided to start going into this direction?
Okay, so I've been doing music pretty much nonstop for about the past 8 years. I got like my first taste of it. I was working basically as a contractor, doing video editing for a production company, and then all of a sudden, they said they ran out of budget to pay. I guess the previous composer, and they wanted to know if I knew any other composers. I said, "Hey, I'll give it a shot." So that's basically how I got started, not knowing how to duplicate that through licensing. So it was just like this accident. And then through that, I eventually started. I got a job composing for slot machines, but then, yeah, it's just like I wanted more, and I just like I remembered okay, I worked on those TV shows doing music, but I learned absolutely nothing from the experience. I didn't know any other composers, so then I started Googling how to get into licensing. That's where I found the syndicate, and so after about 4 months, I started submitting to libraries, and I submitted all sorts of different genres, but the only ones I got like instant feedback from were the rock, metal, hybrid metal tracks, and so that to me just basically said, okay, that's what I need to focus on. So,
And that's a really important point, actually, that you brought up, is that a lot of producers don't know, where do I get started? What genre should I start producing? A lot of producers feel that they can do 4 or 5 different genres.
yep.
But I always caution people against that because I'll just say it, it's impossible that you're going to be an expert at 5 different genres
Mhm.
simultaneously. I don't care how long you've been making music. You're probably, your heart, your soul, something always pulls you into one sound or one particular direction, or maybe a hybrid of a couple of them. But Johnny, obviously, rock, metal, it's in your blood, it's in your bones. Same with me, actually. It's
Okay,
kind
yeah.
of where I started,
Yep.
really in that rock metal thing. And so if I have to go back to my sort of specialty, it's always back to rock. It's always back to that.
Mhm.
And so I do recommend those of you that are watching this and you're getting started in music licensing for the first time and trying to get your tracks out there, be honest with yourself. What's your real strength? Okay, I know that you feel you can do orchestral and funk and pop and hip hop, but which one is really where your heart and soul is? Which one do you really feel you excel at? Which one have you gotten the best kind of feedback from your music? And that's the one that I think that you should focus on to build up your catalog first in the licensing business. Down the road, there might be opportunities to expand and try new opportunities, but to get noticed, to get attention, you got to come with the strongest stuff you possibly can. And I do recommend you stay with that one genre. You don't try to approach a library and say, hey, I'm your everything guy. I'll do all the things for you. Because you know what? It's going to be a whole lot of just crap. It's going to be a lot of stuff that's not that good. But if you can kind of focus, right, and get rid of all those distractions and really just zero in on one thing, then you're going to stand out, and then you can get the attention and get accepted by libraries. So what I want to talk with you today, Johnny, about
Mhm.
is delivering authentic rock music, metal music.
Yep.
When it comes to delivering a specific genre in this business, it has to be the magic word that gets passed around. The buzzword is authentic. Does it
Mhm.
really feel like an authentic rock track or a metal track or a hip hop track, wherever it is? Because a lot of producers, again, when they just dabble in a genre they're not comfortable with, they're using sounds that don't feel like it belongs
Mhm.
there. They're using feels and tempos and rhythms that don't feel like they authentically belong in that genre. And the two main areas that I find in rock that just are always the sticking point for a lot of producers is drums and guitar. Usually the drums sound really fake, MIDI sounding or electronic sounding, or they're programmed in a way when they have really fast 16th note fills. It
Yep.
sounds like a drum machine gun.
Yep.
That's not how a live drummer would play a rock track, right? Same thing with guitars. The guitars sometimes feel very thin, very small. They have a buzzing kind of soda can fizz sound to them, so
Mhm.
they don't feel larger than life coming out of the speakers at you. They got to be really aggressive if you're going to be using guitar sounds. Now, these days, you don't actually have to even plug in a guitar anymore. There's some incredible plugins.
Mhm.
Johnny's used them, I've used them to get an authentic, believable, larger than life guitar sound. And you can do it actually from your keyboard. So it's definitely possible. It's really powerful. But let's start with drums. So when you're thinking about putting in samples or a sound library, into a rock track, what are your overall considerations before you decide what to put into your song?
Okay. Uh, all those mistakes are all the same mistakes that the ones that you talked about are all the same ones that like I made at first. With the it just didn't sound real, so I kept looking for sample libraries, thinking like, okay, I'm going to find one that's going to sound authentic. But what it really comes down to is, once you get the drums sequenced out, you really have to spend lots of time humanizing them. You have to like listen, you know, kind of, I guess, more objectively, because even if everything's hitting hard, if you look away and can't imagine like a live drummer actually playing it, then you need to do more work on the MIDI tracks.
Yeah, so going through the details of the velocity variations, I think that's kind of what you're getting at there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And
So
the
when it
push
comes to
and
the
pull.
sound quality, though,
Yeah.
when you're looking for how to make sure that these drums feel live and that they're not sounding too synthetic, are there sort of some golden rules that you use? Do you listen to reference tracks, or what are your sort of standards to make sure that you're hitting like that real live, authentic sound for drums?
Well, most drums have like kind of like a room ambience, and overhead ambience. You got to make sure that those are balanced good against the snare and the kick, and that there's enough, different, I guess, whatever ambience decays, sloshing of the cymbals, so not every single cymbal is the same. Otherwise, you get phasing problems down the line when it comes to like the fake, I guess, the reverb of the mic emulators. But
That's a really good point. That there's a lot of drum samples, and they call themselves and they market themselves as live drum samples.
mm,
But exactly what you said, there's no ambience to them. There's no live sound to them. There's no really mic bleed between the different samples, and so you might be putting in an actual, and it might have been actually recorded live with a microphone, but
mm,
it's a single kick sample, and then you put in a snare sample, and it does sound a little bit robotic, right? Because
yep,
one sample's cutting off, the other sample's cutting off,
yeah,
and they don't feel like they're living together in the same room. So one way, obviously, to get around that, I would imagine, is you obviously use samples and libraries that have that sort of feature built into them.
yeah.
But what's another way that you would do that if you didn't have a sound library that offered that feature as part of the plugin?
Okay, if you have just like individual like one shot samples, you have to put some sort of modulator on them or some sort of I don't know, saturator, overdrive, or some plugin, feed it into a reverb, like a lot. Every single DAW comes with a reverb. It doesn't matter what the reverb is, just as long as you have different. You can make different articulations just from one sample. I do it all the time still. Uh,
That's awesome. Yeah,
but
so that's really powerful stuff to make sure again that your drums feel believable, because it doesn't take long for a supervisor or a library to know if your track is authentic or not. It's
yeah,
literally within 3 seconds or less.
mhm,
And if you hear that first snare drum fill and it sounds like a robot and it sounds really cut off and it doesn't feel like a live drummer performed it, or all the velocities are all the exact
mhm,
same and you're not seeing this sort of like humanized feeling to it, pass. That you're just going to
yeah,
get rejected. It's not going to feel authentically like it belongs in a rock album or in a rock catalog.
yeah.
So that's certainly some important considerations. Now let's move on to guitars, because as I've reviewed hundreds of songs over the last couple of years with my students, rock guitars are, it's one of those things that seems that most producers are not able to figure out how to um, uh, basically stack them up so that they feel big, right? Because a lot of
Mhm,
times a newbie producer to rock gets one distorted track on their song, and they think they have rock guitars on their track, and it's like, no,
mhm,
no, 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 that doesn't really cut it, really. And so I always sort of say that you need to be stacking guitars, you need to be layering guitars, you need to be like blending and balancing maybe a lower focus guitar and a higher focus guitar,
mhm.
and panning things. So what are your sort of golden rules when it comes to making sure that your guitars feel present, loud, and really like hitting you in that stereo wall image? How do you do that?
I always record a right guitar and a left guitar. And then the biggest mistake that I used to make is I used to put way more distortion and gain than is actually needed. Because if you're layering up a bunch of guitars, that's going to fill in all the distortion that you need. But once you layer up too many guitars with like too much distortion, especially like the digital amp simulation distortion, it's going to give it away pretty quickly, and it's going to cut into everything else in the mix. It's going to cut. You're not going to be able to pick out like the detail of the guitars or any of the other instruments. It'll cover up some of the drums, and just basically panning right guitar, left guitar, different guitars. Um, just make full use of the panning spectrum. That's
Absolutely, yeah. And I put up a tutorial myself basically on how
yeah.
I stack guitars in the academy, and I absolutely follow that guideline. And in fact, I usually do two left, two right.
Mhm.
And I do have some sort of other considerations for. Does that mean you just sort of duplicate the same guitar track 4 times and just put two on the left? No, I don't actually do that. I want to make sure that there are certain qualities from one set of the guitars, and then I want a different set of qualities from the other set of the guitars.
Exactly.
So that exactly what you said. Not only do you fill up the stereo spectrum, you have the left and right covered, but you also have your EQ spectrum a little bit filled up as well. So
Yep.
because you need that low end presence from your guitars. If
Mhm.
you are producing rock music right now and your guitars feel really small, thin, and it's kind of hard to hear what the melody is of the rock guitars or the lead, it's probably because all of your frequencies are focused too much in the high frequencies. It's hard to really feel that or hear that. So you do need to make sure that you include a lot of that low end information that does come along with guitars, especially rock guitars, metal guitars.
Mhm.
But just like Johnny said, without blowing out the mix, without having too much distortion, it doesn't take tons and tons of distortion to get that really edgy sound. And just like he said, if you add too much and you start stacking up too many guitars, well, guess what you lose? You lose the melody, you lose the clarity, you lose all that stuff. And these days, there are incredible plugins, there are incredible sounds, amp simulators, guitar simulators. And it's like I can tell you, I've sent my tracks to professional guitar players that tour for a living. They think I plugged in my guitars and recorded these things. Like even professional guitar players these days can't even tell the difference between if you plugged it in, if you recorded it, or if you used a MIDI. So it's just a powerful time to be involved in producing music, because when you can use MIDI tracks and you can use a MIDI instrument, well, guess what? No more timing issues, right? No more tuning issues. How many times do you have to retune a guitar when you plug it in? I mean, that takes
Mhm.
hours and hours. I just remember the years when I got started of like, oh, I recorded an entire chorus, played back, and realized half of the takes, the guitar, one of the strings went out of tune. Well, guess what? Delete it. There's no editing
Yep.
of that audio. I have to delete it and re-record it. With MIDI, though, nothing's ever out of tune. You can hit the wrong note, but then you can go through and change that note, but nothing's ever out of tune. And if it's not like completely on time, well, guess what? Go through your MIDI note and you can adjust it. So I know some guitar players, they like that old school, like I want to plug in a guitar and feel it. Hey, if that's your flavor, go for it. I'm not saying don't do it, but there are the other options these days, especially if you need to crank out a lot of music really quickly, which obviously
Yep.
Johnny knows about because he's feeding 2 different libraries simultaneously. He doesn't always have the time, I'm sure, to plug in his guitar and crank out 4 tracks and duplicate all this stuff for every single track he does. So you learn all about that stuff in the Sync Academy, and including the tutorials that I provide as well. So we basically both provide a lot of those rock tutorials. So Johnny, thank you so much for joining me
Thank you.
today, man. I really do appreciate it. And for those of you that are watching, you need to get involved in Sync Academy, okay? If you don't have a lot of free time in your week, which most of you guys probably don't, you got part-time jobs, full-time jobs, you got a few hours in the weekends at night, and that's all you can do really to make music. So if you're cranking out a bunch of rock tracks, metal tracks, and they're getting rejected, they're getting ignored, or you just don't feel like you're up to par with the professionals out there, Sync Academy is your solution. That's why we designed this entire platform. That's why Johnny's teaching these. That's why I'm teaching these tutorials. We're trying to help you make sure that you avoid the mistakes that most producers make, and you just basically shortcut your way to making licensable music and authentic music, right? That's the key word that we all learned today. So thank you so much today for joining me, Johnny.
Thank you.